Thank you for the introduction. Thank you for the opportunity to speak. It's a moment of need, so I'm happy to fill in. Amy, a lot of this is going to work more familiar to you. You have to be quiet, please. We'll be talking about this in Belize in June, when it was. Just keep it up, okay? So what I want to talk about is a current project that is going on with a lot of collaborators with support from the Gault School of Archaeological Research as a kind of a sponsor organization. I want to look at Mike McBride in the eye and say, Mike is my project sort of co-organizer. This project did not exist without a lot of Mike's input and energy, so I appreciate our collaboration, and you bring a lot of energy to that and lift me up every day. So thank you for that. I also want to recognize Tiffany over there. Osborne is our, I think our other Gault board member, is the sponsor organization. This means a lot to us, okay? So this counts a whole lot in terms of the Gault School's mission, in terms of understanding people in the Americas, early Paleontology stuff, terminal Pleistocene, cultural dynamics, big picture questions. We do believe that this project is going to have a lot to contribute to that space. So, also want to give a shout out. Nobody here is from the Institute of Archaeology from Belize, but it's from their permission, through their permission, that we get the opportunity to conduct this work. Some folks, not the Institute, but other kind of granting organizations, like National Geographic and so forth, they have a term called parachute archaeology, that refers to people that come in, they do stuff, and they go away, right? We don't leave things behind. Our goal is to get beyond that. I may not talk a whole lot about that tonight, but just understand that what we present to the Institute is not just an opportunity, a request for permission to dig or do research in the country, but to understand the past from an archaeological perspective, from an anthropological perspective. A lot of this has to do with cultural heritage management, resource management. And so our project is looking for ways to invest in trainings and capacity building in those areas as well. So I want to say thank you to the ILA. This guy right here is Sebastian. He's a French archaeologist, Perot Minot, or as he would say, Perot Minot. Choice. Is also a long-time sort of strategic collaborator for this project. So thanks to those folks. And our project personnel, has everything to do with people from the August Pine Ridge Village in northern Belize. And I'll show you a map in a minute. But I just want you to get familiar with that place name. We've been talking about August Pine Ridge quite a bit. August Pine Ridge is a hardworking community. It's off the grid in a lot of ways. They have a lot of issues that challenge their ability to kind of make ends meet on a daily basis, having to do with sort of their access to resources, their access to wage opportunities, their sort of surrounding natural environments. I'll show you in a minute that sand quarrying, which is a shovel activity and dump truck, it's amazing how hardworking these folks are. If it were not for the sort of welcomeness of the August Pine Ridge community, everything that I have to say going forward would be completely off the charts. We would not know anything, and I mean that in the negative, off the charts. So we wouldn't know anything about that. But we have, we've done 2 seasons of work. Nick told me how this worked. Tori Pagano is Caitlin's sort of sister separated at birth, is a Terracon employee. There she is right there. Been with us for both of our seasons so far. Sergio Ayala, incredibly creative mind that he has, very analytically focused. You'll see some of his incredible line drawings. Michael Coach there. Abby Antimasi is a senior this year at Rice University. You'll see her in a couple slides here going forward. She was invited down this past season, 2024, to conduct some demontage analysis that will be part of her senior thesis going forward. And of course, the most incredibly hardworking folks from the August Pine Ridge Village that I've ever been around. And I've been working in Belize since the early 90s. So it's a real, I think, a real treasured opportunity for us to be able to go into this space. I want to go through these slides kind of quickly, and this is to kind of table set, okay? Vocabulary building. Fluting, does anybody not know what fluting means? It's okay, raise your hands. If you don't, Yeah, fluting means these basal channel flakes right here, and this happened systematically, intentionally, strategically, as a technological behavior that's distinctive of a time period that spans from around 13,000 to 12,000 years ago. Clovis is fluted, we know that. Balsam is fluted, we know that. We're adding to that body of knowledge. Fluting occurs throughout the Americas, and one of the points that this project is going to get to is variation in the biface technology, the bifacing technology that includes fluting as a component of the behavioral package. Okay, so we are looking at fluted bifaces. We're looking at more than that, so our record spans beyond just this fluted stuff. But I'll talk a lot about fluting, and that's just an anchoring point for us to kind of co-align technologies that include Clovis, that include fluted fishtail, if you're familiar with South American kind of literature and jargon, and stuff in between. And that's where we are, in stuff in between. Another kind of vocabulary piece that I want to talk about is Pleistocene to Holocene. So these are climate periods. The break between the two is almost exactly 11,700 years ago. And so when we in North America talk about Paleo-Indian stuff, we talk about early Archaic, we kind of blend, I would say, a behavioral implication of what Paleo-Indian means. Big game hunting, that's fine. But temporal implication, that's fine too. But big game hunting and temporal implications, they kind of cross-cut depending on extinction events. So if we were to export a model of Paleo-Indian behavior defined in the grasslands of the high plains of North America into Central and South America, what it means to be a Paleo-Indian is different than that. So what I want to kind of refer to eventually is environmental change, including critically the change from the Pleistocene to Holocene, 11,700 years ago. On this graph, the lower the line is the colder, right? The colder the climates are, the higher, the warmer they are. So we're in the Holocene now, we're getting warmer and warmer. Ice Age, think about like woolly mammoth, mastodon, antique bison, stuff like that. So big game hunting, Pleistocene stuff happens here. Archaic adaptations happens here. This is the transition, I think, that our August Pine Ridge project has the potential to speak to powerfully, is this transition from terminal Pleistocene into early Holocene cultural change. We know from the Americas that people were here, we'll say 20,000 years ago or so or more. We don't really quite know when they showed up initially. White sands footprints dated to 20. Current older age of the estimation of presence at Gault around 20,000 years ago. 14,500 years ago from Monteverde. There are other sites in Central America that date into this sort of later part of the Pleistocene. So we are, I think, today beyond Clovis first. And for me, that means that we need to understand what does this record mean here in terms of the transitions into the Holocene period. So when you talk about Pleistocene to Holocene, we're really going to fix these dates and what this means, like environmental change and behavioral implication applies in our minds. Project background. So the August Pine Ridge stuff is fun for me to talk about, and I'm going to try to limit myself to an hour, but you can go more than that. It's a little bit of a sad story to begin with. I think we're going to turn the ship around. I heard about August Pine Ridge, I would say 5 or 6 years ago from my friend Sebastian. I showed you a picture of him a second ago. He's well known internationally for Paleo-Indian research in Central America. He sent me an email. He's like, "Hey John, have you heard about Belize? Stuff coming out of Belize, fluted artifacts from Belize?" And I was like, "No, I haven't." So he shared with me some email correspondence and pictures that he was getting sent a couple of years ago. A couple of years after that, Mike approached me. He's like, "Hey, have you heard about the stuff in Belize?" I was like, "Yeah, Mike, I have heard about that. It sounds exactly like what we just heard from Sebastian." And so we got our heads together. Mike has kind of swum upstream, to his credit, in terms of putting,
the connections together about how these artifacts have been coming out of Belize, the source areas, the connections, the people involved, people to contact and stuff. And so when I say like the project would exist without Mike's energy, that's 100% true. From my concern, before too long, like the site would be gone, the study area would be gone. So it's your kind of point, right? So artifacts have been making their way in the United States into private collections, been being shown in collector shows for a few years. Finally, archaeologists, a little bit slow to the game, became aware of it, and so our project became established after a 2022 visit to August Pine Ridge to kind of verify accounts, to piece together the stories, and we can see what are the opportunities for learning more about the archaeology that's been going on, what's involved, what's the setting, what's the landform, what's the geoarchaeology. So here's some pictures I'm going to look at, blah, blah, blah. So there's a geology map. This little orange dot on the geology map is a sandy formation. This is what it looks like in the ground. August Pine Ridge is a little ridge. You can't really see what a ridge looks like in a lot of places on the village, depending on where you are, but geologically speaking, it's a turbidite. I want to talk about turbidites anymore, but there's all the sand you can like wish for. The point is it's like kind of an underwater, like ocean floor formation from a disruptive event. When the ocean floor is uplifted, became surface. Eventually, August Pine Ridge people began to quarry that to support regional construction activities. So there's a ton of sand in August Pine Ridge, and the quarrying activity has been going on since the 50s. To the point that huge, vast parts of the August Pine Ridge sort of surrounding area aren't really useful for anything else except going out there and dumping out your trash. You can't run cattle on that area because the sand is not well suited for agriculture. But these trucks come out and these labor crews are kind of pulled together on a family basis, kind of a kin basis. And these are some of the most hard-working guys that I've ever seen in my life. See the next slide. If it were not for these guys hitting stones with their shovels and hearing that, they're like intimately embedded with that landscape, with their labor opportunity, with the experience of extracting that resource, going through that labor motion over again, and they hear that ding, ding. They like hear these stones, they bend over, they pick them up. There's a curiosity factor that's involved. Initially, I think that was sort of channeled essentially to operation or opportunities to vend artifacts or sell artifacts. The archaeology that comes about because of all this work, I would say, starts here. It starts with these guys, right? So that's the message. Anyway, if you look at it from one perspective, it's a really barren, desolate, hard-working landscape. And this is what a lot of it looks like today. We will call it a pine ridge savanna or a pine oak savanna. What it is, though, is a relic landscape of terminal Pleistocene era. And so as the Holocene environmental changes came across Central America, one of the things that happened was the growth of tropical forests in some places. In other places where topsoils and soil conditions were different, what remained was this pinely savanna. And so today if you drive to Bastrop, you'll see a bunch of pine trees and lovely pines and stuff. It was different from the rest of Central Texas. There are these kind of environmental variations in Belize, and for different kinds of reasons, the Pine Ridge, I'll just call it the Pine Ridge from this point on, was an attractive sort of location for early Americans, early Paleo-Americans to come to and to hunker down, to settle, and to drop their stuff. One of the key factors, though, it's a little bit subtle and so hard to recognize on a day-to-day basis, though, are freshwater lagoons or aguadas. And I think these water sources, which persist year-round, so this is from, both of these are from this past season when we're at the end of what's a super hot, super dry season, and water remains. There's a kind of shallow clay pan that let's say captures or perches water at that level. And so water remains year-round available, and I think these water sources, and there's a half a dozen or more around the August Pine Ridge area, and specific to that sandy landform, these water sources are the key to kind of introducing a little bit of variability into what looks like a dry, arid, inhospitable landscape archaeologically. It's very nuanced. The truth is very nuanced. It's very sort of balanced. It's very delicate. And I think it has a lot to offer for folks who are coming and going on kind of a temporary part-time basis. So we would hope to, I think, in the future study some of these water forms in terms of the environmental data that they provide. If your eyesight is better than mine, you'll see these little black dots. These are those iguanas from kind of a satellite view. This map is intended to show the Augustine Ridge area, and our excavation areas and study areas from 2004, in yellow, 2003. So I'm going to talk about a little bit about what our field work looks like, hopefully like 7 minutes, and then I'm going to talk about artifacts. So we start digging in the Pine Ridge, and our goal is to go to areas that have not been sand quarried. And if you back up a couple slides, you think, well, what areas have not been sand quarried? Most of the area has been sand quarried. I mean, it's a desolated landscape. It's a little bit sad to think about. You can see in these slides all these little white dots. This is all sand quarry activity, and I mean the area is like blown out. But there are intact areas. And so we kind of search these little pockets. So our methodology, just quickly speaking, is 2 by 2 meter units, and we dig in 20 centimeter levels. And you think, well, that's not very delicate, and that's all true. But the screening is great. The sand just passes right through, and we just like pick up the artifacts off the screen. Sorry. And that's fine. No, I'm going to get to like why we're better than that in just a second. What we have seen last year, and I think potentially going forward, is on surface exposures. All these brown clusters are flakes, chert flakes. This is what they all look like when we've collected these. There are, in some cases, artifact clusters, and if you've seen other early Paleogene sites, you know, chert clusters, flake clusters is a thing. Sometimes people call it a feature, sometimes people don't know what it means. There's a real open question about whether it's a cultural event or whether it's a kind of a natural event, like sheet water flowing off of the land surface that gathers up little bitty flakes and they kind of travel down the slope. They hang up on a root or something like that. Causes them to gather up. So in 2023, we saw a couple of these. We collected them. This doesn't look systematic, it was. So we collected them systematically. We floated them through like mesh screen, including like window screen. So we do have the ability to kind of insert into this gross 20 centimeter grab of artifacts, finer tuned resolution in terms of artifact recovery. That includes not just the fine screening of this thing that I was talking about, like taking little column samples off of the sides of our units in 5 centimeter intervals, and credit goes to Tori for coming up with this and realizing the need for this. Otherwise, like 20 meters is fine. Anyway, this is credit to Tori. So the point of this is that we do see, I think, as a result of our observations and recovery methods, maybe, you know, in a sandy setting, there are little windows, little vignettes of high resolution cultural activity that give us glimpses into moments or like brief episodes of human behavior. Okay, so I just want you to have that in mind as you grow your appreciation of the sandwich. And that's what this is going to do. So 2024, we continued our lab work. We continued our field work, sorry. And we started some lab work. I think in 23, we were sort of intoxicated on access to specimens that we had borrowed from these guys who were sand quarriers. And that's sort of is the anchor for a lot of our information. You know, the information is available from borrowed specimens, and we'll treat this like a surface collection from the convenience unit of the August Pine Ridge Village, is unbelievable. And I'll show you a ton of artifact photos here in a second. Though through our artifact, through our excavation stuff, you know, doing the lab work, doing the analysis of what we're collecting is going to get us to an understanding of, like, where are these little lenses of cultural activity, where are occupation zones that we can kind of point to or hypothesize where are the pattern behavioral differences within this enormous catchment area. So Abby did a fantastic job. Jason Barrett, whom some of you all know, is a Canadian now, in case you're wondering, came down for a couple of weeks to kind of help support that and to kind of guide Abby in her work. We really began to get into the debitage analysis from 23, plus our work in 24. And I think that going forward, our lab analyses are going to be really important for helping us build this story. So just want to say, we don't just dig stuff or borrow stuff, we also do analysis. Okay, what have we learned so far? I want to go through this really quickly, but the only reason I included these slides about the Maya period occupation on the Pine Ridge is because I knew that Mike was going to be here and he cares a lot about what you're fixing to see. Otherwise, we wouldn't be talking about this. So the Maya folks were there. You know, if you're familiar with like this part of Central America, the Maya period begins around, plus or minus a few hundred years, 1000 BC. They settled villages. It has a lot to do with corn agriculture and as their ability to plant crops that would produce reliably. They put their villages near there, right? Go to where the farm is. The sand ridge is bad for that. And so my hypothesis, our hypothesis is that as corn agriculture became more important in this part of Central America, the sand ridge was not the place to go to, right? So we'll look for ways to test this hypothesis, but what we see though is that Maya folks continue to come out here, and we think for kind of resource extraction, maybe getting pine wood for burning, hunting game for other reasons. Though I'm going to scan through this Monument Valley excavation stuff real quickly. It's not just resource extraction that happens on the Pine Ridge. We came here because of reports of these big stones that they couldn't pull out. We're like, what even big stones? A little story in 2023, I heard stories about small shells. So we spent a day going out to these small shell areas. It was like a quarry where they built out, like dug out some geologic bedrock, you know, to make road fill. I was like, well shit, we gotta get back to work, let's go guys, come on. So the whole day was wasted chasing out these small shells, and so they talk about big stones, like, okay, finally let's go see the big stones. So anyway, the more we dug, the more we saw, and the point of the big stone story, sorry, scroll forward, is probably collapsed monuments that were erected by Maya period people out on the Sand Ridge, like kilometers and kilometers away from actual villages or urban sites. I'll go back a minute. One of the artifacts that we found was what I think is a stonemason's wedge for helping to break apart some of these stone blocks that refit, probably. So what does this mean? I don't really know, but here's a map that Mike put together. There's a site called El Pazito, and there's two parts of the urban complex, straight line almost due west to where we dug. You know, is this a visible monumental landscape to help control azimuth directions for urban planning, something like that? I don't really know the answer to that. But I think that the Maya period use of the Pine Ridge was a big deal. I'm not going to talk about it anymore. So starting with the archaic, we're talking about paleo and archaic stuff. Starting with the archaic, what we know from stuff that we've excavated and what we've borrowed probably indicates that folks occupied the Pine Ridge, you know, on a hunter-gatherer basis. That means intermittently, not in a full-time village way, but coming and going. Continuously, I would say from 13,000 years ago until around the appearance of Maya villages. And that was around 3,000 or 1,000 BC. So that's about a 10,000 year span. August Pine Ridge is probably the only site that I'm aware of that has that record of occupation that we can confirm. So we see that evidence of that starting in this late archaic time period. These are archaic tools, constricted adze. Steve may have seen some from the Colhi area. Is that a question? Shoe-shaped unifaces, horseshoe-shaped adze. Sometimes we call them unifaces, sometimes we call them adze, sometimes we call them shoe-shaped, horseshoe-shaped. There's a lot of names for them. Some are bifacial, so I call them constricted ases, not constricted unifaces. These have been well documented in the literature. Even Steve knows about them since the 1980s, I would say. And the point of these is that as maize agriculture became more and more prevalent in the northern Belize area, we see more and more of these kinds of tools are used for like hoeing and grubbing and stuff. So the dating that's ascribed to these matches perfectly with the appearance of an improved race of maize into the area. So we do see these, and they are evidence to us of last archaic occupations in the region. We're going to go back a little bit in time, kind of zoom out in terms of resolution. Macro flakes, macro blades. We have a ton of these from the August Pine Ridge area. There are probably more pre-ceramic artifacts that are called macro flakes and macro blades than most archaeologists that work in Belize have seen in their lives, just in this little box right here. And there's hundreds more than that throughout the village. What we understand about these, I would say, is very poor, right? The best work was done at Kolha, and on that basis, we would say 5,500 to 3,000 years ago. What we know, though, from other work across the Caribbean is that this exact same technology exists not just on the Yucatan Shelf, not just in Belize, but across the Great Antilles. So the hypothesis that's been published for almost 30 years now is that some of the populations that are attributed or defined as earliest folks in the Great Antilles came from mainland Central America. Dating resolution is going to be part of that problem, but there's a technological pattern that's associated with the northern Belize zone, or the Belize zone with the rest of the Caribbean area that we see at August Pine Ridge. And back in time. We have a ton of ground bowls, pecked bowls, shaped bowls, ground stone, ground hand tools. We call them ground stone bowls, mortars, pestles. I think if you want to ascribe type names like pestle and mortar to this category, it's going to go on for a little while. As we see in the village collections, there's a lot of this material. From controlled excavations in southern Belize that are super important for giving us temporal control for these artifact types. They are recording things that look just like this 9,000 years ago. So the conclusion is that the groundstone toolkit is an indication of the increasing importance of plant use in the diet. Okay? The challenge going forward is to find a huge assemblage of those and to begin to kind of classify them by useware, by sort of morphology, by typology. There's a lot of this stuff from August Pine Ridge, and we would conclude the same as the work in southern Belize. It's so important that it is a reflection of the increasing importance of plant use in those diets at the early Holocene sort of interval. This is a great picture of what one of those bowls looks like. This is a great picture of what one of those pestles looks like. If you wanted to do residue analyses on these, you might find dog DNA, you might find chicken DNA, because when people bring these home from the sand pit, they fill them with water to feed their dog. Not an archaeological problem, but a problem nevertheless. We also see stone balls, and this is an artifact sort of type that we finally clued into this past season, 2024. Stone balls, I think these are bola or sling stones. I think these are going to be pretty important for us understanding the Pleistocene through Holocene sort of landscape behavioral patterns here. Some are perfectly rounded. I think this one is probably a stone that's imported from the Mayan Mountains, which should be 100 kilometers away or so. Some are less perfectly rounded, but the balls that we see in this category are going to be important for us.
Are those bola stones anything resemble within working Waco seekers by chance? Are there any similarities? And why do people think
Yeah. Instances are different, okay? The Waco sinkers
Are
are
they
different.
brought on the end?
We do, so we do see some of these specimens as evidence, they show evidence of like working on the hemisphere, or perimeter, maybe call it.
Yeah.
So others are rounded, some have kind of a grooved, a very faint slot, you know, just like shaped in. So yeah, some yes, some
So
no.
there is manufacturing evidence that they are holding.
Yeah, well, yeah, you know,
Okay.
the manufacturing evidence. Bola versus sling, I don't know, you know, because I think across the Americas, the bola stone sort of morphology and technology varies. You know, some are fully encapsulated in a leather sack or pouch.
Yeah.
Some are just like a sling or,
Yeah.
you know, kind of a leather band around the hemisphere.
So the typology can vary, but they still can they go.
Yeah, we're gonna call them bola or sling stone.
I think done at least a hundred in that middle. Only 1 million. Indicating, 30 round ball in a minute. 1 minute. I'm thinking of water.
So boiling stones versus sling stones or bola stones was the question, I think. Great question. I don't know. This is for us in the future, so we get there. Maybe boiling stones, I don't really know. I'm going to switch gears from hectic ground stones, which is kind of exciting, I guess, to complex bifaces, which are really exciting. Yeah.
Salaries for here.
There we go, yeah. So again, we're working back in time, so the story may be a little bit out of order temporally, but what we think we know from time-controlled excavations and getting these rock shelters in southern Belize and elsewhere in Central and South America is that what we call complex bifaces disappeared, that technology behavior disappeared in our part of Central America around 8,000 years ago. So all very rounded off, right? Maybe 7, maybe 6, maybe like 8, 5, you know, I don't really know. But we have a few types, in air quotes, that have been defined from Belize. Sawmill is a type, we'll talk about that just briefly. Lohse is a possible type, I don't really know what this is. We do have evidence, and I think this is where kind of the sweet spot, we call it the honey pit, for August Pine Ridge research has to kind of contribute to early Holocene to terminal Pleistocene behavior in Belize is how these complex bifaces change through time, what these types look like. Low, L-O-W-E, is a point type that's well known, well defined. I'll tell you that nobody knows what it means. If you say, here's a low point and here's a low point, they might not look exactly the same, or they may not look at all the same. But what people think they mean is a square stem, sharp, kind of aggressive angular notches. Sometimes there's serrated blades, sometimes there's not. Often there's a bevel on this distal end, sometimes there's not. There's a lot of variation in how the stem is prepared and treated. So what people think they mean by low is not as clear as what they do wish. We have, I would say, 50 plus specimens from August Pine Ridge, the largest sort of assemblage from any particular study area in Belize for this particular type. We think another 40 or so have left the country already through some of these networks that we talked about a minute ago. One of the beauty aspects of the August Pine Ridge thing, one of the beauties of this is that we see not just the finished product, but we see the manufacturing sort of failures along the way, these preformed failures at various stages of production. So I want you to keep it in mind as we get into the fluid and biface stuff. It's not just the finished points, that capture our attention, but it's the stuff that people failed at along the way. And as we all know, that's where behavior kind of manifests itself and is most easily or best recognized. We have all kinds of manufacturing failures, not just for low, but for other stuff. So this is, if it's a low, I think it's a low point preform we're calling it. This is a fluid, a notching failure. The shoulder gets sheared off. This is what happens with the Calf Creek stuff. This lighting is bad because we saw this at the end of the day against the, kind of the truck headlight. This is an early stage, and what you see right here are a couple of kind of notching entry points that have been kind of pre-started, right? So they've got a triangular setup, and they're fixing to go in and make those aggressive notches that result in these strongly barbed shoulders. So here's a beautiful finished point, and what we will look for in the future are flakes that look just like this, right? If we can see those final stage notching flakes, that helps us understand in these sandy contexts. If you're familiar with sandy sediment archaeology in Texas, you know it's a challenge. But when we see the technological assemblages that reflect distinctive behavior, that'll help us kind of clue into that. When I talked about serrated edges a minute ago, you'll see a lot of these serration points kind of line up with like ridge lines, like they're sort of platforms for flakes that have been like pre-prepared for removal. I think the serration, as you can see on this specimen though, is an intentional design element. And we can see the preparation for serration. We can see the beveling early in these preformed setups. So you see a bunch of low points in our assemblage, and there's a lot of technological information, behavioral information that we will get into going forward. Sawmill points, totally different type, very badly defined. No sawmill point has ever been recovered from a dated, secure context. Very distinct from low points. Some of them have this longitudinal kind of diagonal parallel flaking, right? I'll talk about sawmill points in a minute, but maybe I'll press. We'll call that early Holocene record, and I want to kind of scroll back in time again into late Paleoindian time period. By late Paleoindian, let's kind of say up until around 12,000 years ago, maybe a hair after that. Yet to be determined. Pine Ridge points, that's what these are, and these are 4 specimens that we saw in 2023, never been reported in the archaeological record of Central America. Not reported in Belize. So like the opportunity to see stuff that's never been found, never been reported in an area, any geographic area of study is pretty precious to us, and we are grateful, for that opportunity. What we see is, specimens that are broken. This is probably impact damage broken in the haft, and from the compression back against the haft element, and the distal tip is broken. Maybe the same thing here. Maybe some preform damage. So these Pine Ridge points, we defined in 23, kind of a big deal for us, and they help us build a bridge from Belize, scroll ahead, down into South America. Some of the specimens are exquisitely well produced, and we see a lot of variability. What we're seeing is a lot of variability on how the shoulder morphology grades into a rounded sort of stem, okay? This is, I think, the most impressive specimen that we have access to today. But we see variability, and following Mike's guidance, we're going to call these variety 1 or variety 2, based on shoulder to stem behavior. Okay, so some is a little bit barbed, some is angular, right? Let's put these in a category. Some is rounded to a contracting stem. Let's put those in a category. So when we talk about like how do archaeologists know things, we see lots of specimens, we build assemblages, and we make comparative analyses, and we propose models. We're in the process of trying to understand this right now. We make sense of our Pine Ridge bifaces, so just understand and appreciate the variability, but the consistency. In relation to Paihan, is a key word from South America. So these are point types that have been defined in northern South America, dating to as early as 13,000. I think that dating is probably a little bit loose. I would put them as coeval with fluted bifaces down there. We'll talk about that in a minute. And later, okay? So contemporaneous and later. So we're grading out of fluted biface stuff. Greg Maggart, who works at Oklahoma DOT, did his dissertation with Tom Delahaye on Paihan materials, and he dates late Paihan and early Paihan. He separates those two based on the consistency of the shoulder morphology. Blah, blah, blah. Anyway, here's a point specimen that was recovered from Trinidad that's exactly like what we see from our study here. So I'll show you this next slide now. There's no evidence that supports this sequence whatsoever, but I think it's a beautiful model, and we're going to go with it until somebody proves it's differently. Until Mike tells me to shut up. Shouldered pine ridge bifaces, variety 1. Angular shouldered pine ridge bifaces, variety 2. To sawmill that I talked about briefly, to low points. So we're hoping that this sequence will help us cover the gap from 12,000+ years ago to 10,000+ years ago. Okay. So our goal, is to build these chronologies, fill in the space with technological data, typological data. Don't ever repeat this because nobody looks at that. Okay. Other late Paleogene stuff. So if you're a listener, you've understood that when I'm talking about Paihan to Pine Ridge, you're like, well, geographically, this is South America. So, well, what about North America? Great question. So, more late Paleoindian, there's a type that we'll call unfluted landslide. It's not a type, it's a kind of a class that includes a couple of types. There are some unfluted landslide bifaces. This has been published by Fred of 2021. Wonderful specimen. These are in our borrowed assemblage. These have been, I think, passed out of the country, so we have access to photos of those. They compare with stuff that's got to be niche to find and use the word types in central Mexico. Tehuacan. One is El Riego that looks kind of Clovis-like. This one, the Flaco type. Let me back up a second. Anyway, this Flaco type is characteristic of, I'll call it like pentagonal outline. So there's lightly constrict, like converging, and then as the resharpening behavior, that tip comes in sharply. Okay, so a couple of types. They come from Tehuacan. They indicate influences coming south of central Mexico. This is a map that's based on the Houston Astros color template. Again, Mike hates it, but there's a lot of strong reds and blues in there. Trinidad is that point I showed you a second ago, Tehuacan Valley, August Pine Range. So if you go from low point early Holocene, we're going back in time into very last Pleistocene. We look at geographic regions of cultural shared influence. It's a lot bigger than low, but smaller than fluid points, which I'm going to talk about next. So, back in time, as this journey goes, what we see is evidence of Clovis behavioral influence. That's here. What we see is evidence of, we call it fishtail from South America. There's a term fell, F-E-L-L, fell point, which is apparently synonymous with fishtail points. And then there's stuff that's in between. And what our focus is on is distinguishing between Clovis behavior, fishtail behavior, to get to what's in between. And this slide is an error. We will call this fishtail after this point of the conversation. This is a talk that I recited from previously. So this particular specimen, we call it wasted fluted, but it's not. I think it's fishtail. So let's talk about fishtail real quick. A lot less common in Central America and Belize than previously suspected. This impressive specimen, which looks like this, is probably almost 15 centimeters across if it was complete. Clearly a manufacturing failure that is from Belize. It was shown to me by a landowner at the Belize archaeology meeting 2007 or something like that. Pretty incredible. I got photos, and Sergio Ayala's remarkable line drawings kind of helped illustrate sort of the characteristics and the dimensions of that. But what we see are these sharp kind of shoulders, strong stem, blah, blah, blah. Manufacturing failures, that's what that looks like. From August Pine Ridge, we see some examples of this sharply shouldered variability. A broken stem. This one's probably broken in the course of being used. Again, broken in half as compression forces it backwards, and the tip breaks off. We also see the manufacturing failures. And so if we think about South American influences coming north, we know that people are adopting this as a tool form, right? But they're not just borrowing it or getting it from their neighbors or the new best friends. They're making it in our study area. And to me, that's significant. Two styles of fishtail points, and we're not prepared to go into more detail about this, but as we're in contact with our colleagues in South America, I've pressed about, like, what's the difference between this and this? And I go, it's a fishtail point. Well, yeah, I know, but what about this? Well, it's a fishtail point. What about this? Well, it's a fishtail point. So we would say, well, these are totally different, right? And I think there's a lot of variability that is yet to be sussed out in this fishtail technology and morphology. We're probably not going to get to that resolution in our study area, but my point for us is that the complexity of terminal Pleistocene cultural behavior is high, more than we thought it was. There's a lot of fishtail variability that is yet to be defined, and is like coming north into Belize. There we go. Okay, Clovis influence. We are hard pressed today to come up with an example of a Clovis point in Belize. If you read the literature in that area, you will have seen examples. There are specimens that have been referred to as Clovis points. Ladyville Clovis, Ladyville's the town. Ladyville Clovis Point is the best known. I don't think any of this stuff represents actual, true, pure Clovis behavior. And so what we're going to look for is Clovis influence, Clovis trends, rather than Clovis behavior. Okay? And so for us, that's the goal. And I illustrated, or showed this Sergio drawing because of the sequence of nearly overshot flakes that are on this particular specimen. We need to look to North America for analogs. I'm going to try to go through these really quickly to kind of understand what Clovis looks like, because we don't see pure Clovis in our area, right? But there's a ton of Clovis research that's been done up here, including Texas, thank God. The graph and read cache, shows us big bifaces that have huge thinning flakes. They show, preforms that assume different sort of squared base, lanceolate shaped outlines. This work, I think, comes from, put it back up again, this wonderful volume that Bruce Bradley and Mike Collins put together with Andrew's help, a couple of other losers up there. The graph read, yeah, that's the graph read cache right there. Yeah. From Gault, supposedly from Gault. I think as best we can reconstruct, this is the graph and read cache from Central Texas.
Is that book back in print yet?
Say that again?
That book was out of print for a while.
This one?
Yeah.
I don't think it's back in print yet.
I have a PDF if anyone needs it. I'll put a signature.
Robert Laston has a PDF. I would refer you to a chapter about blade core technology in particular. Anyway, okay, so Clovis, what we know about Clovis, the point of this little series of slides is to kind of take our North American analog into Central America. I think the model is okay for instructive purposes, but the point is to say, like, what's our baseline to compare against? Like, what are we saying and how's it different from what's been documented in North America? So, we got early interval, we got middle interval, we got late interval, and they're all similar in terms of converging tips, lanceolate outlines, squared bases, the prevalence of overshot flaking. I'll say that again because I think that the prevalence of overshot flaking is a huge deal. I'm a believer in intentional overshot flaking in terms of defining like Clovis-related behaviors. So for Clovis, intentional overshot flaking, and that's what these diagrams illustrate, is part of the program, right? So we will borrow from this sort of constellation of traits and technological behaviors and activities as we separate our stuff from Belize into Clovis and fishtail and something other. And so the goal for us, is to figure out which of this reflects more Clovis or less Clovis, not pure Clovis. So we have distal fragments, we have proximal fragments, we have medial fragments. Some of these things are shovel damage, because of the manner of extraction, which creates a bit of a challenge for us. But if you can kind of see past that damage, the technological behavior is like beautifully expressed. We see like full face or nearly full face flaking, setting up overshots or maybe overshot, you know, for these early stage biforms. Tabular margins, which is, you know, assigned or associated with Clovis. This sort of flaring marginal edges with a squared base. I would very much say is not necessarily pure Clovis. So what, you know, our next challenge in terms of like putting these into buckets is like, how do we recognize North American influence from something else, okay? So these are some shots, you saw this a minute ago. This artifact was found by a 10 or 11-year-old boy playing sand pile in his grandmother's front yard that came from the sand quarry. And Mike walked up and he's like, hey, here you go, Mike. You know, so the prevalence of this material is just unbelievable, and our ability to kind of, you know, help folks see it and recognize it is moving. There's a little a fluted termination, you know, along the medial edge of a kind of an early mid-stage preform. Common to Clovis stuff is these big tabular sort of platters, right, that are bifaced preforms that have, as they're flaked and shaped and thinned and worked down, big monster thinning flakes. These are almost 15 centimeters across, you know, so there's not a technology that we know of in Central America that is associated with this kind of tool reducing behavior other than North American Clovis influence. So we do see some of this indication in our study area, which is very impressive. We talked about stemmed, fluted, or fishtail. We've talked about Clovis. Wasted fluted, and I'm trying hard not to use the word wasted Clovis, okay? But to scroll ahead to the finish line, what we see is Clovis influence coming north out of North America, or coming south out of North America. We see the fishtail stuff coming north out of South America. And where those overlap, there is a kind of a hybrid that has a strong wasted half element, strongly fluted, but it's not Clovis. It's not pure Clovis. And so, you know, our goal, I think, is to kind of recognize the reduction sequences that get us to these final outcomes, but that reflect or capture these sort of original behaviors. So these are just some specimens, photos and specimens that we put at this wasted, fluted point. There's a lot of variability in the hafting element. These are just about all of them are preformed. This is an exhausted, finalized specimen. They're not quite overshot flaking, right? But we do, and once in a rare while, see like full face or nearly full face flaking. We have a lot of fragments that are the sort of medial distal portion, but they're missing the stem. And what we think, or where we're going with this, is that the difference, between the Clovis and the fishtail is the element of the stem part. It's not the fluting. It's the creation of the stem. And I think there's something that's going on with the stemming as a verb, activity that creates a kind of a risk moment that results in a lot of failures. We have also a lot of stems that are fluted that don't have that distal portion, that was detached at some point of this creating a neck component. You're not a technological kind of beat, then I apologize. We're kind of scroll through this as quickly. So we have several late stage, and this is important controversy, as of 6:30 tonight, right? Yeah, so cutting edge knowledge. Mike tells me that these are finished. I asked Chris to intervene before we got into a fight about it. What we see is distal ends on these preforms that to me look unfinished, okay? And this one in particular has got a little tabular edge that you can see reflecting the light.